National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, by the way, says the actions by the 13 Russians has united Congress in taking action against the Kremlin. Listen.
In this effort to polarize our societies, to support rightist groups, I mean, even the most extreme forms of fascist groups, and then groups on the left, in an attempt to pit Western societies against each other, all that is done is appeal to those big fringes, while uniting all of our polities actually against Russia and Russian interference.
Former Justice Department official Robert Driscoll joins me now. He served as Deputy Assistant Attorney General. And before we get into the weeds of all of this and drill this down, from top of mind, what's your reaction to these indictments?
Well, I think they're significant. I mean, I think we had a pretty good idea from public statements that there was certainly Russian involvement online, kind of stirring the pot, so to speak, in the 2016 election. But this is a fairly detailed indictment. And I think importantly, it's that they've got the actual names, account numbers, PayPal accounts, all those things set up. And so this isn't the kind of indictment where you're relying on testimony or something like that. It appears that there's a pretty good digital footprint that DOJ has laid out, which implicates the Russians in terms of at least being active through online, media in the 2016 election.
So, Robert, that in and of itself should be disconcerting and alarming to not only members of Congress and the president, but even to Americans themselves, particularly looking forward to the midterm elections of 2018 and then ultimately the presidential election of 2020. It's clear that now, based upon these allegations and this indictment against these 13 Russians and 3 Russian organizations, that something is amiss and we need to better protect our electoral process.
Well, I think there's somewhat of a diplomatic or public relations angle to this indictment as well, because, I mean, frankly, the 13 Russians are not going to be dumb enough to come to the U.S., and Russia's not going to turn them over. So I don't think they're ever going to stand trial here, or I think that's at least unlikely or not the main point. I think part of this is the U.S. government sending a shot across the bow of the Russians, essentially saying, we know this happened, we know the methods you use, and we're going to be monitoring for this kind of stuff in the future. So I think that's part of what the indictment is doing. I think all of that's very important. Then that's separate and apart from the kind of Trump issue and the politics surrounding
this.
Well,
that being said, not to interrupt you, but critics of the Trump administration have argued that President Trump is not focusing on Russia's interference in our election. They argue he's only concerned about validating that there was no collusion between his team and Russia. But now, based on how will those critics respond, rather, to President Trump's National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster's statement made during that international conference in Munich, making it clear that Russia's interference in the 2016 U.S. elections is beyond dispute?
Well, I think the McMaster statement is good, and hopefully we'll get everybody, Democrats and Republicans, on the same page in terms of separating the issues. That Russia's involvement in the election and possible involvement in future elections is a separate issue which everyone needs to take seriously, regardless of political party, because we obviously don't want a foreign country influencing elections in some illegal manner. And that's a separate issue from the issue of the Mueller investigation with respect to campaign collusion or anything like that. Right. I think that both sides, both Trump and his critics, have kind of merged the two issues in some respect, as I think every time Trump has previously heard about Russia, he's dismissed it because he views Russia as shorthand for, your election was tainted or somehow doesn't count. And I think now it's healthy for people to separate these two issues. And even last week, we saw the intelligence community speaking in unison, warning about Russian online influence and cyber issues affecting elections.
So let's review real quickly for our viewers who may be just discovering this, what Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein announced with this. He said the Russians were charged with, quote, conspiracy to defraud the United States and illegally using social media to divide Americans and disrupt the 2016 presidential campaign. McMaster's comment today, his comments today are in response to that indictment, and some view his comments as somewhat being a sharp contrast from what the Trump White House previously discussed, calling Special Counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation a witch hunt, a hoax. So what political ramifications are we looking at here based on these indictments in light of these charges against Russia?
I don't think many, in the sense that I think that, you know, the president will continue to press his innocence and focus on the fact that, at least thus far, there hasn't been any evidence of collusion. So that's clearly what he wants to focus on. And I think that, you know, critics of the president will focus on the fact that there now is pretty definitive proof of Russian involvement. And the president has made some dismissive statements about the entire investigation being a hoax. And this part of it clearly is not. Although the presidential statements have been all over the map on that. So I think that hopefully this will help separate those two issues for everybody.
Okay. Robert Driscoll, we got into there. We appreciate your perspective on this and shedding some of your professional expertise on this based upon your experience with the Department of Justice. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me, Kelly.